Most people, when that gavel comes down, they break, they cry, they collapse, they scream. But then there are the ones who just stand there, completely stone-faced, like the years the judge just handed them do not even register. Today, we are going through 15 cases of killer couples reacting to life sentences, and trust me, some of these reactions are going to stay with you. Larissa and Christopher Rodriguez. So this one starts with a phone call. Christopher Rodriguez's brother was stationed overseas in Pakistan, and on December 18, 2017, he called Cleveland police to report that his brother and his brother's girlfriend had buried a child in their backyard. That tip led investigators to a shallow 4-by-4-foot grave at a home on West 80th Street, where they found the body of 4-year-old Jordan Rodriguez, wrapped in blankets and trash bags. Jordan had been born 26 weeks, premature, was non-verbal, and had special needs, so he was already one of the most vulnerable kids you could imagine. According to prosecutors, Larissa and Christopher woke up on September 22nd and found Jordan unresponsive. Instead of calling for help, they buried him in the backyard. An autopsy found he had previously fractured ribs and a fractured wrist, both consistent with ongoing abuse. For over a year before his body was found, Larissa had been telling his school, family members, and child services that he had gone to live with his father in Texas. Both pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter, felonious assault, child endangering, and gross abuse of a corpse. The plea deal kept murder charges off the table entirely. Larissa, who had given birth to her 10th child while awaiting trial, received 25 years without parole. Christopher received 28 years, the maximum available, also without parole. Neither addressed the court, but Judge Nancy Margaret Russo did, and for the first time in 22 years on the bench, she cried. She told the courtroom it was a horror, that in 22 years she had never shown emotion, and that this was one of the worst things she had ever seen. She also told Christopher directly that she could not understand why he refused to tell the truth about what happened, and that she hoped someday he would. A children's services caseworker named Nancy Caraballo, paid to make regular visits to the Rodriguez home, was later convicted of falsifying her reports on at least 11 occasions and running a food stamp fraud scheme with Larissa. In a 2024 civil trial, Jordan's estate was awarded $12 million across multiple defendants. Jeremy and Christine Moody. On the morning of Sunday, July 21, 2013, Jeremy and Christine Moody went to church. That same afternoon, they drove to the Jonesville, South Carolina, home of 59-year-old Charles Parker, popped the hood of their car to fake car trouble, and waited. When Parker came outside, Jeremy pulled a gun, forced him back inside, and the couple told both Charles and his 51-year-old wife, Gretchen, exactly what was happening and why. Jeremy shot them both. Christine slit Gretchen's throat. A surveillance camera caught them leaving, and police identified Jeremy almost immediately because he had the word skinhead tattooed nearly ear to ear across his chin and white power across the top of his head. Charles Parker was a registered sex offender, and that was why he was targeted. Jeremy and Christine were members of a white supremacist group called Crew 41, and they believed it was their mission to hunt down and kill sex offenders. Gretchen had no criminal record whatsoever and was killed purely because she was his wife. After his arrest, Jeremy directed investigators to a handwritten list at his home with the name and address of another sex offender he planned to kill the very next day. Both pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder, kidnapping, first-degree burglary, and firearm possession. Before sentencing, they made a real show of remorse. Jeremy told the court not a day went by that he did not regret what happened. Christine read from the Bible and said she believed God had forgiven them, asking the judge for 30 years so they could grow old together. When asked whether anyone had offered her anything for her plea, Christine answered, just fame and fortune. Circuit Judge Lee Alford had watched them grin at each other, exchange glances, and occasionally snicker through the Parker family's victim statements, and he said so directly before handing down consecutive life sentences for both. After the sentence came down, they shared a brief kiss, and the act was over. Jeremy shouted at the Parker family on his way out that child molesters did not deserve to live. Outside, Christine told reporters she had no regrets, and that killing Parker was the best day of her life. When asked about her courtroom apology, she said her lawyer had made her say it, and when asked about the victim's family, she told reporters she hoped they would die too. Eric and Dia Millerberg. Alexis Rasmussen was 16 years old, and she babysat for the Millerbergs. That is how this whole thing started. Over time, the arrangement became something far more dangerous. The couple supplied Alexis with drugs and alcohol, and the three developed a dynamic that a 16-year-old was in no position to navigate. On the night of September 10, 2011, Alexis came to their North Ogden home, and Eric injected her with methamphetamine and heroin, including once directly into her neck. Afterward, she complained of feeling cold and shaking, took a bath, and was helped into bed. When Eric and Dia came back to check on her, she was not breathing. Dia, a former licensed nurse, attempted CPR, but it was too late. So instead of calling 911, they loaded Alexis's body into their truck, left their 6-year-old daughter at home alone, strapped their infant into the back seat, and drove to a remote area near the Taggart exit off Interstate 84 in Morgan County, where they dumped her body. Alexis was missing for 38 days before an associate of Eric's known as Eric Peanut Smith led investigators to her remains. Eric was convicted of child abuse, homicide, unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, obstruction of justice, and desecration of a body. Judge Scott Hadley sentenced him to 5 years to life on the homicide charge, with additional consecutive terms on the remaining counts. Parole board records show Eric is not eligible for his first parole hearing until October 2046. During sentencing, Eric apologized quietly but made clear he did not believe the responsibility was all his. What no one mentioned in court was that from inside the jail, Eric had also arranged to have a hit put out on Dia after she testified against him. Dia pleaded guilty to 3 felonies and received concurrent terms of up to 5 years in prison, a lighter sentence in exchange for her cooperation and testimony. At her sentencing, she wept as she entered her plea and told the judge she had lost all common sense and had not been in a position to help Alexis when it mattered. Skylar's mother, Dawn Miera, addressed her directly, saying she goes over and over what she could have done differently, and that she still does not understand what Alexis found in Dia that she could not find at home. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. This is probably the most covered criminal case in the United States over the last decade, so here is the core of it. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, who married in Hawaii in November 2019, shared an apocalyptic belief system that included the idea that certain people had been taken over by evil spirits and were no longer worth saving. They called these people zombies. Within months, 3 people in their lives became targets. Lori's 16-year-old daughter, Tylee Ryan, and her 7-year-old adopted son, Joshua J.J. Vallow, vanished from their Rexburg, Idaho home in September 2019. Their remains were found buried on Chad's property in June 2020. JJ had been bound in duct tape and suffocated. Tylee had been dismembered and burned in a fire pit. 2 weeks before the children disappeared, Chad's first wife, Tammy Daybell, died at their Idaho home under what authorities later ruled were homicidal circumstances. Chad and Lori married in Hawaii shortly after. Lori was convicted in May 2023 of murdering her children and conspiring to murder Tammy, receiving 3 consecutive life sentences without parole in Idaho. Chad was convicted in May 2024 and sentenced to death the following month. Then came Arizona. Lori represented herself at both trials and was convicted in April 2025 of conspiring to murder her 4th husband, Charles Vallow, for his $1 million life insurance policy, and in June 2025 of conspiring to murder the ex-husband of her niece. On July 25, 2025, Judge Justin Bareski sentenced her to 2 additional consecutive life sentences, on top of everything Idaho had already given her. As she was led out of the courtroom, someone in the gallery shouted at her to rot in prison. Throughout both Arizona trials, Lori used her courtroom time to complain about jail conditions, challenge the fairness of the process, and tell the court that the victims of her crimes were happy in heaven. Chad showed no visible reaction when his death sentence was read. Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy. This case involves 2 teenage best friends rather than a romantic couple, but the premeditation behind it absolutely places it here. Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy attended University High School in Morgantown, West Virginia, and had been close friends with 16-year-old Skylar Neese since childhood. By 2012, the two had begun cutting Skylar out. When investigators later asked Schoaf why they killed her, her answer was simply that they did not like her anymore, and that Skylar knew about the relationship Schoaf and Eddy had developed between themselves, which they wanted kept secret. On July 6, 2012, just after midnight, they picked Skylar up from outside her apartment window. She thought they were going out to smoke like they had done before. They drove roughly 30 miles across state lines to a wooded area in Brave, Pennsylvania. When they arrived, the three socialized for a bit until Shoaf and Eddie said they had forgotten a lighter in the car. When Skylar turned toward it, the two counted to 3 and attacked. Skylar tried to run, but Shoaf tackled her and kept stabbing. At some point, Skylar grabbed Shoaf's knife and stabbed her above the ankle. When it was over, they changed clothes, wiped everything down, and tried to bury the body. The ground was too hard, so they covered her with branches and left. Shoaf's story stopped matching Eddie's under questioning in late November 2012, and she confessed shortly after. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in May 2013. Eddie, the very day her trial was set to begin in January 2014, also pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. At Eddie's sentencing that January, she sobbed from the moment she sat down, before proceedings had even properly begun. She made no statement and offered no apology. At Shoaf's sentencing in February, she cried as she addressed the court and said she was sorry, that the person she was that night was not really her. Skylar's father, Dave Neese, told the court Shoaf could take her apology and sit on it, and that the only reason she cooperated was because she got caught. Shoaf received 30 years with parole eligibility after 10 years. Eddie received life with eligibility after 15. Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari. Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari had a 10-month-old daughter named Mary. On August 2, 2018, they found her unresponsive in her crib at their Solon Township home and called 911, but not before Seth called his parents, texted someone about selling a goat, and Googled a news story about a kidnapped rapper. An hour and a half passed between finding Mary and calling for help. When the dispatcher asked if Seth was sure his daughter was beyond saving, he said she was dead as a doornail. When she asked how he was holding up, he said it was just another day. It is what it is. Mary weighed 8 pounds when she died, only about 1 pound more than she had weighed at birth. The medical examiner testified that in 22 years of work, he had never seen malnutrition like this, and that by the end, Mary could likely not crawl or even lift her head. She had been left alone in her crib for 19 hours. Crime scene investigators found the house in disarray, with flies and mouse droppings throughout, a kitchen fully stocked with food for adults but almost no baby food, and Mary's mattress so saturated with urine it had pooled into a plastic tub underneath the crib, the wood frame grown with mold. A newborn onesie was baggy on her at 10 months old. Both parents told police they had not sought medical care because of religious beliefs and distrust of doctors, and Seth later told a news station in a jailhouse interview that nothing was keeping him up at night. The clip from their August 2018 court appearance, where the judge explains they are facing life in prison, was viewed over 11 million times. Seth stares blankly with his mouth open while Tatiana weeps beside him. Seth was convicted of first-degree murder and first-degree child abuse in January 2020 and sentenced to life without parole. Tatiana withdrew an earlier no-contest plea and went to trial. Her defense argued Seth had abused her for years and that he had prevented her from getting help for Mary, including testimony that he held a gun to her head and struck her across the back while performing what he called an exorcism during her pregnancy. The jury convicted her on the same charges in October 2021. And Judge Paul Denefeld sentenced her to life without parole the following month. Erica Butts and Shanita Cunningham. This is the one people in true crime communities still pull up when they talk about courtroom reactions. In late October 2009, a 3-year-old girl named Serenity Richardson came to stay with Erica Butts and Shanita Cunningham at their home on Congaree River Drive in Somerville, South Carolina. Butts was Serenity's godmother and had been best friends with Serenity's mother Ieshia since childhood. Ieshia was in the middle of relocating from Detroit and left her daughter in the care of the person she trusted most, expecting her back in roughly 2 weeks. Serenity was never coming home. According to prosecutors and court documents, both Butts and Cunningham beat Serenity repeatedly with a belt and with plastic coat hangers throughout the entire period she was in their care. She also had a large burn on her leg. The assistant solicitor for Charleston County told the court that the only parts of Serenity's body that had been spared were the soles of her feet and her armpits. Every other area showed injury. The cause of death was full-body blunt force trauma. Butts admitted to police she had beaten Serenity with a belt after the child urinated on the floor. When Serenity's breathing became shallow, Butts called her own mother instead of 911. Cunningham suggested placing Serenity on ice and held bleach under her nose in an attempt to revive her. Neither worked. Cunningham then fled the state. It was Butts's mother who ultimately called 911. Serenity was already dead when paramedics arrived and was pronounced gone at Somerville Medical Center. Cunningham pleaded guilty to homicide by child abuse. Butts entered an Alford plea. At sentencing on November 3, 2011, 2 years to the day Serenity died, Ieshia told the judge all she wanted was justice, so she could finally breathe. Butts, sobbing, turned to Ieshia and said she would always love her and was so sorry. Circuit Judge Dedra Jefferson then sentenced both women to life in prison. Both Butts and Cunningham collapsed to the floor at the same moment. Both were wailing. Cunningham appeared to lose consciousness entirely. Family members on both sides of the gallery erupted. Court officials physically lifted both women off the floor, placed them each in a wheeled chair, and rolled them out of the room. Diana Lovejoy and Weldon McDavid Jr. Diana Lovejoy and her estranged husband, Greg Mulvihill, had been 2 years into a bitter divorce and custody battle over their young son when, just before 11 on the night of September 1st, 2016, Greg received a call from someone claiming to be a private investigator. The caller told him to drive to a remote dirt path off Avenida Soledad in Carlsbad, where he said he had left evidence of abuse that could help Greg in the divorce proceedings. Greg brought a co-worker along. When they arrived, a figure in camouflage was lying in the bushes ahead of them with an AR-15 rifle. A shot rang out. Greg was struck under his left armpit, the bullet exiting through his back. He survived. The shooter was Weldon McDavid Jr., a former Marine, School of Infantry instructor, and firearms trainer at a gun range in Oceanside where Diana had been taking lessons. The two were having an affair. Prosecutors established Diana paid McDavid $2,000 to carry out the shooting. The burner phone used to lure Greg was traced to a Best Buy purchase Diana made, and DNA evidence from the bushes at the scene was matched to McDavid. Diana's own aunt testified at trial, family Christmas gathering in 2015. Diana had asked whether she knew anyone who could scare or kill her husband. Jurors also heard that Diana owed Greg $120,000 from the divorce settlement, due just weeks after he was shot. The jury deliberated about half a day and convicted both of conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder in November 2017. As the clerk began reading the verdict, Diana appeared stunned, then leaned sideways in her chair and passed out cold. Gasps swept through the courtroom and her family begged for help. Judge Sim von Kalinowski cleared the room entirely. Fox 5 reporter Jamie Chambers, also a trained lifeguard and EMT, got to Diana and stayed with her until paramedics wheeled her out on a gurney. When court resumed, McDavid put his head in his hands and cried. At sentencing in January 2018, both denied any plot had ever existed. Judge von Kalinowski sentenced Diana to 26 years to life and McDavid to 50 years to life, and ordered each to pay $500,000 in damages to Mulvihill. Benjamin and Erica Sifrit. Memorial Day weekend, 2002. Benjamin B.J. Sifrit and his wife Erica, both 24 and from Altoona, Pennsylvania, were vacationing in Ocean City, Maryland, staying in a penthouse at the Rainbow Condominium on 112th Street. On the bus to Secrets nightclub on the night of May 25th, they met 32-year-old Joshua Ford and 51-year-old Martha Jeannie Crutchley, a couple from Fairfax, Virginia, who paid the Sifrits bus fare when they came up short. The four spent the evening together, and when the night ended, the Sifrits invited them back to the penthouse. Neither Joshua Ford nor Jeannie Crutchley was ever seen alive again. According to statements Erica later made to investigators, the Sifrits accused Ford and Crutchley of stealing Erica's purse once they were inside and forced them both into the bathroom. Joshua Ford was shot 4 times through the bathroom door with a .357 Magnum. Jeannie Crutchley was also killed, though so little of her remains were recovered that the official cause of death could not be determined. Benjamin admitted in court that he dismembered both bodies about an hour after the killings, packed the remains into garbage bags and containers, and dumped them in a dumpster behind a Food Lion in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. During the investigation, a 22-year-old woman named Melissa Seling testified that the Sifrits had subjected her to the same scenario earlier that same week, and she had barely gotten out alive. What caught them was a burglary. 6 days after the killings, just before midnight on May 31st, Ocean City police found the Sifrits loading merchandise from a Hooters restaurant into their Jeep. Inside Erica's purse were the driver's licenses of the still missing Ford and Crutchley, spent shell casings, and handcuffs, and she was wearing a ring belonging to Ford on a chain around her neck. Their trials were held in separate counties because of the pre-trial coverage. Benjamin was convicted of second-degree murder in Crutchley's death and sentenced to 38 years. Judge Paul Weinstein told him it was one of the few times in 20 years he disagreed with a jury's verdict, called it a thrill killing, and said Benjamin was a butcher. Erica was convicted of first-degree murder in Ford's death and second-degree in Crutchley's, sentenced to life plus 20 years. She sobbed before the court and told the victims' families she did not feel worthy to stand before them and did not expect their forgiveness. Jonathan Hearn and Sabrina Limon. Robert Lyman was a 38-year-old railroad mechanic working for the BNSF Railway out of Tehachapi, California. He and his wife Sabrina had been married since 2000 and had 2 children together. Sabrina met Jonathan Hearn, a 24-year-old firefighter and paramedic from Hesperia, at a Costco where she worked part-time. The two bonded over their shared Christian faith and began an affair. When Robert found intimate texts on Sabrina's phone and told her to cut it off, she kept seeing Hearn anyway. According to Hearn's later testimony, the two eventually began planning how to permanently remove Robert. The first attempt was arsenic mixed into Robert's banana pudding, which Sabrina packed into his lunch, and then, getting cold feet, called to warn him not to eat because it had gone bad. The second attempt was a staged shooting made to look like a robbery. Sabrina gave Hearn Robert's work schedule and a layout of the BNSF facility in Tehachapi, a site Robert rarely used and where he would be alone. On August 17, 2014, Hearn rode to the facility on a motorcycle and shot Robert to death. The plan was to collect $300,000 in life insurance and continue receiving his railroad family benefits. Investigators had no clear leads until a mutual friend told police that 2 weeks after the murder, Hearn had left him a voicemail sounding strangely apologetic about Robert's death. Detectives began wiretapping both phones, and what they recorded included the two using Bible passages in conversations about avoiding detection and asking God for forgiveness. Hearn eventually pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against Sabrina in exchange for a reduced sentence. Based on his testimony and the wiretap recordings, a jury convicted Sabrina of first-degree murder in October 2017. At sentencing on November 16, 2017, Hearn stood before the court and read from a written letter, weeping as he addressed Robert's children directly and told them he had dismantled their home. Judge John Brownlee sentenced him to 25 years and 4 months. Sabrina was sentenced on February 21, 2018 to 25 years to life, with her motion for a new trial denied at the same hearing. Fred and Rose West. Fred West and Rose West turned their home at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester into a place where young women were brought, restrained, sexually tortured, and murdered. The killings stretched from 1967 to 1987. Fred targeted women from bus stops and children's homes, and Rose, who was 15 when Fred first approached her, became an active partner. Victims were bound, gagged, and suspended from beams in the cellar before being killed. Remains were dismembered and buried throughout the property. Retaining fingers and kneecaps became a signature. 8-year-old Charmaine, Fred's stepdaughter, was murdered by Rose in 1971, while Fred was in prison. Her remains were buried under the kitchen floor of their earlier home on Midland Road. When Fred's first wife Rena came looking for her daughter, Fred killed her too and buried her in a field in Muchmarkel. Their own daughter Heather, 16, was murdered in June 1987 and buried under the back garden patio. For years, the family joked with neighbors that Heather was under the patio. When those comments reached police in 1993, investigators began excavating. Within 55 days, they had recovered 9 victims from Cromwell Street alone. Fred was charged with 12 murders in December 1994. On January 1, 1995, he was found dead in his cell at Winson Green Prison, having taken his own life. Rose stood trial alone that October, pleading not guilty on all 10 counts. She showed almost no emotion throughout, and the only visible reaction she had in the entire trial came when Heather's name was read aloud. The jury convicted her unanimously on November 22, 1995. She was sentenced to life with a whole life order and will never leave prison. She has maintained her innocence ever since. Jennifer Pan and Daniel Wong. Jennifer Pan grew up in Markham, Ontario, with Vietnamese immigrant parents who had built everything from scratch and expected the same from their children. For years, Jennifer fabricated an entire academic life. She failed high school but told her parents she graduated, invented a university degree, invented a pharmacy job, and left the house each morning pretending to attend class. Meanwhile, she was still seeing Daniel Wong, a former boyfriend with a criminal record who dealt drugs, a relationship her parents had permanently forbidden. When they discovered the full extent of the lies, they pulled Jennifer home under full supervision. She and Wong began planning to have them killed. On November 8, 2010, Jennifer unlocked the front door and 3 armed men entered. Her parents were taken to the basement and shot. Her mother, Bichha, died at the scene. Her father, Han, survived but was left permanently blind. Jennifer was loosely tied to a banister with a shoelace. When Han came out of his coma, he told police her hands had never actually been bound and that he had seen her whispering to one of the gunmen in a familiar way. She confessed on her 3rd police interview. The jury convicted all 4 defendants on December 13, 2014. Jennifer appeared upbeat before the verdict, picking lint off her lawyer's robes. When guilty was announced, she showed no emotion. After press left, she wept uncontrollably. On January 23, 2015, all 4 received life sentences with no parole eligibility for 25 years. Han submitted a written statement saying when he lost his wife, he lost his daughter at the same time. In April 2025, the Supreme Court of Canada upheld all convictions in a 7-2 ruling. The case is fully closed at the appellate level. Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Nicholas Godejohn. Gypsy Rose Blanchard spent her entire childhood in a wheelchair, shaved bald, fed through a tube, and presented to the world as a child fighting leukemia, muscular dystrophy, and epilepsy. None of it was real. Her mother, Dee Dee, had factitious disorder imposed on another, where a caregiver fabricates illness in someone in their care. Dee Dee subjected Gypsy to unnecessary surgeries from birth, shaved her head to look like a cancer patient, and kept her isolated from anyone who could tell her the truth. She told Gypsy she had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. Gypsy could walk. She had no disabilities whatsoever. Around 2012, Gypsy found Nicholas Godejohn on a Christian dating website. The two built a secret online relationship over about 3 years. When Dee Dee discovered it and forbade contact, they began planning a way out. On June 14, 2015, after Dee Dee fell asleep, Gypsy texted Godejohn to come inside. She gave him gloves, duct tape, and a knife, then locked herself in the bathroom with her hands over her ears. Godejohn went into Dee Dee's bedroom and stabbed her 4 times in the back. The two took over $4,000 in cash and took a Greyhound to Wisconsin. Friends who saw alarming Facebook posts called police, who traced them to Godejohn's address in Big Bend. Both were arrested on June 15th. Gypsy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in 2016 and was sentenced to 10 years. She was released on December 28, 2023. As of June 2025, Gypsy completed her parole and is fully free. She welcomed a daughter named Aurora in December 2024 with her partner Ken Urker and published a memoir called My Time to Stand. Godejohn was convicted of first-degree murder in November 2018 and sentenced to life without parole. He showed no reaction when the sentence was handed down. Pamela Smart and William Flynn. On May 1, 1990, Greg Smart, 24 years old, came home to his condominium in Derry, New Hampshire, and was murdered in his own foyer. Pamela Smart was 22 and working as a media coordinator at Winnacunnet High School when she began a sexual relationship with a 15-year-old student named William Flynn, whom she met through a school drug awareness program. She told him she feared losing everything in a divorce and could not let it happen. She threatened to end the relationship if he did not kill her husband. Over several months, there were failed attempts. On the night of May 1st, Flynn, now 16, entered the condo with 17-year-old Patrick Randall and 2 others. Randall held a knife to Greg's throat. Flynn pressed a gun to the back of his head and fired a hollow-point bullet. Greg Smart died on the floor of his own home. The case broke open through a teenage intern named Cecilia Pierce, who worked with Pamela and knew about the plot. Pierce secretly recorded Pamela acknowledging the killing and threatening Pierce that talking would send her to prison for life. Those recordings were played at trial. Flynn, Randall, and 2 others cooperated for reduced sentences. The trial was one of the first in American history to be fully televised. The jury convicted Pamela on March 22, 1991. She received mandatory life without parole. Flynn and Randall were both paroled on June 4, 2015. Pamela remains at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York. In June 2024, she publicly accepted full responsibility for Greg's death for the first time. As of January 2026, she has filed a habeas corpus petition arguing constitutional violations at her original trial. Monica Cementilli and Robert Baker. Fabio Cementilli was a 49-year-old celebrity hairstylist in Los Angeles whose clients included Jennifer Lopez and Russell Crowe. He and Monica had been married since 1997 and had 2 daughters, Jessica and Isabella. Monica had been having an affair with Robert Baker, a former adult film actor and registered sex offender who was her racquetball instructor at a local gym. Prosecutors argued that when divorce would have cost Monica everything, she and Baker planned to kill Fabio instead. The day before the murder, Baker and an associate named Christopher Austin tried to kill Fabio outside a restaurant. Austin could not go through with it. The next day, January 23, 2017, Monica drove to a Target to build an alibi and left a back door unlocked. Baker entered the home, found Fabio on the backyard patio, and stabbed him repeatedly until he stopped moving. He fled in Fabio's red Porsche, found abandoned shortly after. Fabio's daughter Isabella came home from school and found her father slumped in his chair. She called 911 while trying to help him. He was already gone. Police first thought it was a home invasion, even though Fabio's $8,000 Rolex was still on his wrist. The case cracked when Baker's DNA from a cut during the stabbing was matched to the scene. Baker pleaded no contest to first-degree murder in July 2023 and received life without parole. Austin received 16 years to life in May 2025 for testimony. Monica was convicted in April 2025. At sentencing on June 23, 2025, Fabio's sister called Monica demonic. Judge Ronald Cohen called her the mastermind and said Baker lacked the intelligence to have planned this alone. Monica received life without parole. She was crying throughout. Her attorney filed an appeal the same day.